The world stood still, not because of a race, not because of a coup, but because of a letter. When Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, put pen to paper and addressed Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, no one expected what followed. It wasn't politics, it wasn't sport. It was the collision of two storms, one shaped by speed, the other by fire. One man who ran to liberate, another who rose to liberate. Not was a fire, and in that letter was a message so powerful, so human, so electric, it echoed far beyond stadiums and battlefields. It shook the soul of a continent. The letter began not with formality, but with fire. Usain Bolt didn't write to flatter. He wrote to awaken. His pen became a weapon of truth, aimed not at a crowd of fans, but at a man who stood like a wall against the flood of Western domination. Captain Traoré, it read, "You don't just lead a country, you carry the weight of an entire continent's hope on your back." In that sentence, the air shifted. This was not an athlete speaking to a politician. This was a warrior recognizing another. Bolt spoke of strength, but not the kind born in stadiums. He spoke of a different power, the kind that walks into fire without flinching, the kind that refuses to kneel to foreign chains. "Your courage is not just military," he wrote, "it is spiritual." These words were not crafted for applause. They were born from pain, from memory, from a legacy that began on the ships of the Middle Passage and still haunts the soil of every black nation. Bolt saw it. Traoré lived it. And that bridge of recognition was what made the letter thunder like a drum in the chest of the African youth. He called out what the world tries to silence. He didn't hide behind niceties or diplomacy. "You have enemies not because you've failed," he obey, "not because you've refused to obey." That one line cut through centuries of manipulation, betrayal, and theft. It exposed the invisible empire that still feeds off African minerals, African blood, African silence. Bolt didn't come to advise Traoré. He came to salute him, to remind him he is not alone, that millions who never held a rifle still march beside him in fear. Only urgency. They fear though fear, roan he confessed, but they fear more the man who runs fast, he's to run away. But they fear more the man who refuse to run fast, the Usain. That single sentence turned the conversation into a revolution. It stripped away the polite mask worn by institutions and placed the truth naked before the world. A world where being brave is dangerous. A world where being black and unbowed is a crime. Bolt admitted that his speed made him famous, but it was Traoré's stillness in the face of death that made him immortal. He reminded the Captain Empiled have always tried to tame men in Verdal and always failed. "You are not the villain they paint," he wrote. "You are the mirror they hate." Because when a young African stands up, he forces the world to remember everything they tried to erase. The letter was not long, but every word was heavy. It was not poetic, it was prophetic. Bolt didn't offer blessings, he offered truth. A truth Traoré had already chosen to live by, a truth that echoes louder than gunfire, that outpaces propaganda, that defies propaganda. You are right, the gravity of oppression. This was not a letter of admiration. It was a lightning strike, a call from one son of the soil to another, drenched in sweat, scars, and defiance. If this message hit your soul like a lightning bolt, don't scroll past it, like if you feel the fire. Comment if you stand with courage over comfort. Subscribe if you're ready for more voices that shake the system. Share this with someone who needs to hear truth spoken with no filter. This isn't content, is a movement. This is a movement, be part of it. Usain Bolt didn't write as a celebrity. He wrote as a survivor, a child of struggle, a product of hunger and heat and discipline. He told Ibrahim Traoré, "I did not grow up with power. I grew up with pressure." His words didn't wealth, they echoed wounds. The dusty roads of Sherwood content in Jamaica became the opening lines of his testimony. He wasn't molded by privilege, he was sculpted by resistance. And in that reflection, he saw Burkina Faso. Not a country on the map, but a mirror of his own roots. He spoke of barefoot mornings and empty pockets, of mothers who prayed instead of eating, of fathers who carried shame like a second skin because they couldn't provide. I ran, he said, not because I loved it, but because it was the only way out. That pain, that desperation, it built a fire that no metal could extinguish. It carved purpose from poverty. It taught him that speed means nothing if you don't know why you're running. He didn't run for glory. He ran to escape chains. He ran because stillness meant surrender. Bolt saw in Traoré not just a soldier, but a runner of a different race. A man running against systems older than slavery. A man sprinting uphill while the world throws stones. You fight with bullets, he wrote, but your weapon is dignity. Dignity, that rare force that cannot be colonized. That inner posture that makes the world uncomfortable. Because when a black man refuses to bow, it breaks the spell cast by centuries of submission. The letter bled history, it dripped with memory. Bolt drew a straight line from Jamaican plantations to African soil. He reminded Traoré that both their peoples were auctioned, shackled, erased, and yet still rose. He called it the rhythm of the resilient. He didn't quote textbooks, he quoted pain, and that's what made it real. He said, our ancestors didn't die for fame, they died for breath. Breath that was stolen. Breath that we now carry like sacred fire. He connected the roar of a stadium to the roar of a people denied their voice. He called Traoré's resistance a relay baton passed through time, from Garvey to Sankara to the captain himself. When I broke the record, Bolt wrote, the world clapped. But when you break chains, the world trembles. That contrast was no accident. It was an indictment, a revelation, a reminder that some victories are celebrated while others are silenced. Usain wasn't romanticizing the struggle. He was honoring it. He was showing that greatness doesn't belong to the West, that the soil of Africa breeds not just leaders, but legends, that the same fire that pushed him off the starting blocks is the same fire that made Traoré stand in the face of global power and say, no more. This wasn't a letter to inspire. It was a letter to ignite. Because when men from opposite corners of the earth recognize the same chains, they don't ask for freedom, they take it. Usain Bolt didn't just write to Captain Ibrahim Traoré as a man. He wrote as a symbol. His words were not confined to the page, they were aimed at the veins of a generation. He told Traoré, our fight is not about borders. It's about the soul of every black child who was told to sit down, shut up, and stay small. That sentence alone didn't knock, it kicked the door open. Because Bolt didn't see himself as just a Jamaican. He saw himself as African blood in motion. And through that vision, he reached into the heart of unity. He said, we've been divided by oceans, flags, and lies. But they forgot one thing. We remember. It wasn't just a call for alliance. It was a reminder that the scars we carry may be from different battles, but the wound is the same. Colonization didn't just take land. It shattered memory. But now, memory is rising. Now, the children of revolution are waking up to the sound of one another's footsteps. And Bolt made it clear. This isn't the age of silence. This is the age of convergence. His letter turned into a compass. Youth of Africa, youth of the Caribbean, he wrote, you are not meant to run from your problems. You are meant to run at them, full speed, with fire in your lungs. He didn't glorify medals, he rejected escape. He declared that victory without truth is vanity, that the finish line means nothing if your people are still in chains. And in those words, he lit the fuse of something terrifying to oppressors, unity fused with purpose. Bolt didn't just compare running to revolution, he weaponized it. He made the 1,000 meters a metaphor for the long race of liberation. We train our bodies, he said, but now we must train our minds. Because speed without strategy is useless, muscle without message is wasted. He dared the youth to rise, not as entertainers, not as influencers, but as architects of a new future. A future where no African needs permission to lead. A future where no black child is told to shrink. He honored Traoré not for defiance, but for clarity. The clarity to see through the fog of manipulation, the clarity to resist the applause of empires that only love black excellence when it serves their comfort. You chose resistance, Bolt wrote, and in doing so, you gave us permission to remember who we are. That line was more than powerful. It was ancestral. It was ancestral because it didn't just speak to now. It echoed from the mouths of men who died unnamed, women who screamed in languages stolen from history, children who prayed for a tomorrow they never saw. Bolt didn't beg the youth to wake up. He warned them. If you don't run toward freedom, you will crawl toward obedience. And in that sentence, he drew the line in blood. The time for applause is over. Now is the time to gather, to rise, to run, not from pain, but into purpose. Because every step forward is a step away from the lie they sold us. When Ibrahim Traoré read Usain Bolt's letter aloud, the silence in the room was louder than thunder. His voice didn't shake, it roared. Every word carried the weight of generations denied their right to rise. This wasn't a letter anymore. It was scripture. It wasn't admiration, it was recognition. A revolutionary saw himself reflected in the footsteps of a runner who had escaped gravity, not just physically, but symbolically. And as Traoré spoke, something ancient woke up in the hearts of those listening. He paused after every sentence, not to breathe, but to let the fire sink deeper. He said, "The man who breaks records honors the body, but the man who breaks chains honors the ancestors." That line didn't come from a podium. It came from pain. From nights spent plotting survival. From days where every handshake was a threat, every meal a gamble, every smile a mask. Traoré knew that being praised by the world's fastest man wasn't a trophy. It was a warning to the world that he was no longer running alone. He looked the youth in the eyes and said, "This letter proves something they've always feared, that we see each other now, not as tribes, not as territories, but as one force rising, one rhythm building." He wasn't just moved, he was sharpened. Bolt's words didn't comfort him. They fueled him. They became armor. They became thunder in his chest. Traoré didn't respond with thanks. He responded with a vow. He declared that he would protect the people of Burkina Faso with the same unshakable devotion Bolt gave to his training. That just as the world tried to distract Bolt with fame, they would try to distract him with fear. But like the runner, he would keep his eyes locked on the truth. He said, "I will not slow down, not because I am fearless, but because fear has no place in a man who carries history on his back." That line was more than powerful, it was prophetic. The soldiers listening stood taller, the elders watching wept. The children who had once looked to cartoons now looked to courage, because Traoré had done what no enemy could stop. He made the youth feel again, not with slogans, not with speeches, but with raw, undiluted truth. And it came from a man who used to run alone under the sun of Jamaica, a man whose speed broke physics, but whose words broke chains. Traoré didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a man who had buried too many dreams in silence. He spoke for every soul who chose dignity over comfort, for every rebel who was buried without a name. Bolt's letter reached deeper than politics. It reached the marrow. It reminded him that this fight was not for glory, but for generations unborn. And in that moment, the revolution wasn't just military. It became spiritual. It became inevitable. It became personal. When the people of Burkina Faso heard Usain Bolt's letter, they didn't just hear a message. They felt a prophecy being fulfilled. Across villages and cities, from elders to children, something unexplainable moved through the air like electricity. It wasn't just that a world icon had spoken the name of their leader. It was that he had spoken their truth, out loud, without apology, without fear. This was no gesture of charity. This was a torch passed from one symbol of resistance to another, and it set the entire nation ablaze with purpose. In the marketplaces, people gathered around radios and phones, their eyes wide, their breath held. Every syllable struck like thunder in their bones. It wasn't about Usain Bolt, the athlete, It was about Usain Bolt, the survivor, who understood what it meant to rise from nothing and still be told you're too much. They didn't care about records. They cared about the fire behind them. They saw in his words a reflection of their own blood, their own battles, their own buried hopes that refused to die. For the first time in a long time, they didn't feel forgotten. They felt seen. Mothers wept not from sorrow, but from the shock of hearing a global voice tell them they mattered. Fathers stood in silence, fists clenched, shoulders straighter than usual, realizing that their sacrifices were not invisible. Youth who had considered fleeing the country suddenly spoke of staying, of fighting, of building something worthy of their pain. Bolt's words reached the parts of the soul that politics could never touch. They cut through the noise of propaganda, fear, and fatigue, and reminded the people of something sacred. They still had a pulse. Children started writing their own names in notebooks with more pride, no longer ashamed of their roots. Teachers used the letter to ignite discussions, not about athletics, but about liberation. Artists turned quotes into murals, musicians wove his words into lyrics, and poets breathed new life into the revolution with language. This was not inspiration. This was ignition. This was collective resurrection. This was the moment where identity shifted from burden to weapon. In the darkest corners where despair had been normal for too long, Bolt's Let's letter became a flare in the sky. It told the world that Burkina Faso was not weak, not backward, not broken. It was waking up. And a nation that wakes up with purpose is a danger to every system built to keep it asleep. The letter didn't solve poverty. It didn't erase wounds. But it sparked something that tyrants fear more than bullets. It gave the people belief. Belief that they are not alone. Belief that they have a voice. Belief that they are the authors of their destiny. And in that belief, new leaders were born, not in office chairs, but in street corners, classrooms, and farms. Not with microphones, but with truth in their eyes and fire in their lungs. The revolution had always been waiting for this moment, and now it had a rhythm. Now it had a face. Now it had a name. If this message lit a fire in your spirit, don't let it burn alone. Like the video, share it with someone who's ready to rise. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every word. And if you want more truth that shakes your soul, subscribe right now. Because this is not entertainment. This is a movement.